For those of you who have been here a while, you know that we don't really do a lot of diagnosis specific episodes on the pod. But today we're going to make an exception and we are going to dive into learning disabilities because they are often really misunderstood and they are commonly co occurring with other types of neurodivergence.
Yeah, so today let's talk about it. What are we talking about when we talk about learning disabilities and what is misunderstood about them?
Welcome to Parenting Neurodivergent Humans. I'm Dr. Morgan Beidelman. I'm a psychologist, former teacher, parent to two kids, one of whom is neurodivergent, and I am neurodivergent myself.
And I'm Brianne Colpitz. I'm a school psychologist, parent to two neurodivergent kids, and I'm ADHD, which means I'm autistic and have ADHD. Okay, learning disabilities are often misunderstood in popular culture, leading to people not noticing the signs of a learning disability in their kiddo or themselves. Before we get into what's misunderstood about learning disabilities, let's talk about what fits under this term. Morgan, can you do us a solid and do a little rundown of the three learning disabilities under this umbrella?
Oh, yes, absolutely. So there are three specific learning disabilities that fall under the learning disability umbrella, and those are dyslexia, dyscalculia, and dysgraphia. I'm going to stop my brain because my brain wants to reorder those, but that's okay. Dyslexia is probably the most talked about easily in the learning disability world. However, it's very misunderstood in popular culture. Dyslexia is a language-based disability, not just a reading disability, which is how people often think that it is experienced. Difficulty with reading is one of the symptoms of dyslexia, but is far from the only one. Common symptoms of dyslexia also include things like struggling to memorize math facts or phone numbers, struggling with rhyming, messy handwriting, struggling to remember the days of the week or the months of the year in order. All of that is part of that dyslexia profile. Also, retrieval of words and saying words that sound similar to the word that you mean, also part of that. So this is why we want to make sure that we zoom out when we think of dyslexia and really recognize it as a language-based disability, not this narrow definition that's solely related to the reading aspect of language.
Right. I would say that that's not just a pop culture misunderstanding. I think in schools we misunderstand it a lot too,
Mhm.
because teachers are not really trained in dyslexia or learning disability specific, interventions, even just the signs. And yeah, I think that's widely misunderstood. So yeah, thanks for outlining that for us.
Yeah, absolutely. And the dyslexia shows up in other cultures as well. It is not specific to the United States, which I think is also something to recognize that this is happening all over the world, regardless of your first language. So the next one is dysgraphia, and a lot of times dyslexia and dysgraphia kind of get lumped together. You can have one without the other, or you can have both for sure. Dysgraphia is a learning disability that is involves writing, and for people with dysgraphia there's a discrepancy between what they know and what they can produce in writing. People with dysgraphia can communicate their thoughts, but they struggle to effectively translate that into writing, or something on a written page. And so a lot of times what you'll hear as a teacher is like, they had so many, they knew the content, but then when they come to writing it down, they are giving like, two sentences or things like this. It's often misunderstood as not putting in enough effort in the written work. If it's dysgraphia, that's not what's going on here. We do have people that don't want to put all their stuff in writing, but that is not the same as actually having the learning disorder of dysgraphia. How this manifests is that they have difficulty with the physical aspect of writing. And then this is compounded by the discrepancy between what they want to say and what they're like able to do in actual writing. And then there's often a messiness to that handwriting that also, and because sometimes that's not even legible, and there can be difficulty in that spelling as well. So we see some similarities and some similar hallmarks to dyslexia, but there's even more happening there. A lot of times when we're looking at that disability, there's additional assessments that we do that are specific to the motor aspect of writing. And that's one of the good ways to differentiate the two. Another good one that we'll tend to do in evaluation is we'll let somebody do something speech to text and then let them handwrite it and look at the difference between what they're able to produce. And then our last one in this kind of realm is dyscalculia, and that is a math related disability that can really think be described best as a math blindness. People with dyscalculia struggle to understand, file away, and then utilize their basic math facts, which is really essential to math problem solving. And it's unfortunate because dyscalculia is the least researched and the least understood of the learning disabilities. But like current research is starting to give more details on what that experience is like and effective interventions. Dyscalculia can look like even in older kids if you give them a set of objects, or like they need to count something, they'll count always from the beginning. They have a really hard time like looking at something and clustering them. Or if you've ever had a die and like you roll it and the kid is like 1, 2, 3, they have a hard time looking at that and going 3 or 5 or 6, right? That's something that we often see in that profile. They often also have difficulty with biggest or smallest, and and kind of like being able to conceptualize that, or difficulty with place value. And regardless of kind of the different avenues from which you've tried to tackle that, they're really still struggling. And I think a good example of this is when you put somebody in real life situations and they still struggle, because a lot of times kids in general conceptually struggle with math, but then you go to the grocery store and you say, tell me which eggs are cheaper, and one is $4.99 and one's $7.99, and they're like, boom, and they can pull the cheaper egg. That's not what we're talking about here. That's a kid who's struggling with conceptual understanding the way it's presented in school. Boom, you put them in a real life situation and they can figure it out. If this person has dyscalculia, they're going to struggle with it conceptually at school. And then if you were to be standing in the egg aisle, they would still have a very hard time recognizing the differential in that cost.
I think that's so interesting, the real life example, because as we're going through this, I'm like, wait, do I have this? You know, and I'm like, oh, wait. But then that distinction that you just made is like, oh no, I can find the cheapest eggs or whatever. And, I have more practice or whatnot. But I think you cannot have like a math brain, using air quotes here, where like math isn't your strength, but it doesn't mean you have a math learning disability or dyscalculia. So, yeah, I think those are great points. Look at me learning some things. Each of these learning disabilities can occur on its own, as Morgan already said, and often they can co occur or pair up with other diagnoses, another form of neurodivergence like ADHD, autism. So while each learning disability has its own unique set of symptoms and intervention strategies, there are lots of things that are true for all learning disabilities. So let's talk about 5 often misunderstood things that are true for all learning disabilities. So the first one is that learning disabilities and intellectual disabilities are entirely separate and unrelated diagnoses.
Mm-hmm.
So let me dig into that a little bit more. So, intellectual disabilities or intellectual developmental disorders, so those are abbreviated as ID or IDD. Those involve limitations in cognitive functioning, so like learning and problem solving, and adaptive functioning, so daily life activities
Mm-hmm.
such as hygiene, taking care of yourself, those types of things, right? These cognitive limitations cause learning and development to occur more slowly than is typical. Children who are diagnosed with an intellectual disability usually have an IQ score of 70 or below and require additional support with daily life tasks such as personal care or communication. Learning disabilities or learning disorders affect how the brain takes in and processes information. So it's more of a processing situation, not like a cognitive disability. The brains of people with learning disabilities acquire, organize, retain, understand, and use information differently than the brains of people without a learning disability.
Mhm.
People who are diagnosed with learning disabilities have specific learning challenges and typically score average or above average on IQ assessments. A learning disability impacts how someone learns, but does not impact their overall ability to learn in general.
Mhm.
Okay, so second idea. Hopefully that all makes sense. Second idea, like other forms of neurodivergence, people with learning disabilities are not broken. Their brain is just wired differently. We scream that from the mountaintops pretty much every episode, so hopefully that's not new info. But learning disabilities simply describe a particular way the brain works. Learning disabilities are often thought of as someone having like a mostly, quote, normal brain, but then struggling to do one type of things, like, say, spell or read with dyslexia. But actually, like other forms of neurodivergence, the brain of people with learning disabilities, I don't know if I said that right, the brains of people with learning disabilities are just wired in organizing information differently. People with learning disabilities are often artistic, creative people with unique ideas and novel approaches to problems because they process the world differently than most people do. Shout out to our editor and producer, Erica. Her brain works differently because of a learning disability. And oh my gosh, it's such a compliment to our team. So, yeah, shout out for different wiring.
Yeah, I often say that thank goodness we have these neurodivergent brains, right? They are
For
an
sure.
assets. They're such assets. Because they think differently, they literally think differently
You're
about
right. Yeah,
all
yeah.
sorts of things. And
Yep.
that's wonderful, that diversity of thought. Okay, I'm here to tell you about number three, which is the concept that learning disabilities cannot be cured or outgrown, but they can be remediated. This is really, really important. I know a lot of adults who say things like, I think I outgrew my dyslexia, or I outgrew my dyscalculia. And because it is not just that one thing, right? There are strengths within those profiles and areas of deficit within those profiles. It's not that the person outgrew it. Like they turned 18 and they're like,
I'm
ta-da.
done. Take
Yep.
this dyslexia out of me.
Goodbye. What has likely happened is that area, the area that felt most impactful, has been remediated. You still have all the strengths that you probably had within that profile, but as we get older, we tend to internalize those as like, that's who I am, right? And not realizing some of the aspects that might be, be because of this profile. And in addition to that, they have often had their strengths have been used to kind of help circumvent, get around some of the challenges. So I hear that a lot too. Or the other thing that sometimes happens is that they have found like another way to do something. So
Yeah.
a lot of people are like, "Oh, I'm an audiobook person." Right? Well, you could be an audiobook person just because you're an audiobook person. You could also be an audiobook person because you are a slow adult reader because you have dyslexia, right? You may not still have the difficulty on a word by word level that happens in childhood if it has been well remediated and somebody has taught you skills in a way that is consistent with how dyslexic brains learn best, then you could have a combination where the skill has been remediated and you've learned to accommodate yourself as an adult. And so that's very, very common.
Yeah, we don't grow out of it. We hopefully learn how to accommodate ourselves. The brain is still wired as it was.
Yeah, we have skill built, we have accommodated ourselves, we've used our strengths to help circumvent some of the areas of challenge. We've pursued things that help us shine,
Yeah,
right?
right.
And so sometimes as an adult, you feel less impacted than you did as a kid, where there's less autonomy. And it's like, this is how we learn, this is what we do in school. And once you kind of graduate from the K-12 schooling and you can pick and choose your classes a little bit more, or you can pick and choose your trade, et cetera, et cetera. Some of the aspects of the disability part feel less disabling.
Right.
The other thing is that people with learning disabilities are not lazy and they don't necessarily just need to try harder. It's not the answer, even if it looks like it might be. And where I see this most often is when a teacher, a parent has a child who has a learning disability, and they're like, okay, so you have difficulty in math, you have difficulty in writing, you have difficulty in reading. No problem. We're just going to double, triple the amount of time that you work in that area. Like, right, we're going to go to school all day, we're going to go to tutoring 3 4 times a week, we're going to do that for 3 hours a day, or like whatever it is. In the summer, we're going to do it for 3 hours a day. And I deeply understand that desire and that instinct, because we are very well conditioned to be like, more is better. Like,
Right. Right.
and in many cases, more is better, but the right type of more, and in and kind of like spaced appropriately, is actually best. And so what I mean by that is, we want to make sure that we're not just having a kid do the same thing that they've always done. We want to pick the just right intervention for them. In terms of the dyslexia, that would be something called Orton Gillingham, and we have a bunch of resources on that. I put it in the show notes. But that is a just right intervention for most kids with dyslexia. And there's a lot of different programs that use that. And again, we're not going to go and put that kid in for like 3 4 hours a day. We're going to do the right thing, and we're going to do it for a certain amount of time. And then we're also going to let that kid go and have all of their strengths, right? I would never advise to choose a reading intervention or a math intervention over soccer if this kid loves soccer, right? I would be looking how to get a little bit of that and this other thing, because what can often happen is that we do so much, and it is actually like flooding to the system, and
Mm,
your ability to learn just like turns off at a
yep.
certain point. And
Yes,
so
it
that
does.
deep desire is there, the intentions are right, but really we want like the right dosing, the right intervention, and letting this kid be who they
A
are.
kid.
Yeah, let them be a kid.
Yeah.
That difficulty and that fatigue is not because they're lazy. It's because this thing is really hard. When's the last time you did something new and hard? Right? Like, I tried crocheting. There was a lot of swear words, and I lasted about 15 minutes, and I didn't even get the loop that I was trying to get, and it was a great reminder of what it's like to do something really, really hard.
Yeah. I like that question. All right. So, supporting kids with learning disabilities is not just about teaching missing academic skills. Instead, effective interventions and support for learning disabilities should work to accomplish three things. One, teach the student how their brain works, their strengths, what they might need extra support with, and what types of supports work for them. Two, increase the student's ability in area of weakness with direct, explicit, and repeated instruction from someone trained in working with students with their specific learning disability. You can't provide Orton Gillingham instruction if you've never been trained in it. Provide support and accommodations across other subjects to ensure that they can reach their full academic potential. For example, a student with dyslexia may benefit from having audio versions of their reading assignments in history class, not just in like language arts class, all right? This disability is there no matter what classroom you're in. The most effective interventions offer the most effective interventions occur in small and repeated chunks that allow the child to build knowledge and skills over time and then apply this learning in multiple situations. So, like Morgan said, we're not, going in the deep end and staying there until we fatigue. We got to do like kind of like bursts, okay? Remediation is a slow and methodical process where over time gaps are lessened and closed, skills are built, and areas of strengths are developed. If you're looking for more information, like Morgan said, she's got a lot of info on her Instagram and also a free download about evidence based intervention specifically for dyslexia. So we will link that in the show notes. It's a great resource.
Thank you for joining us. We'll be back next week to talk about preemies, babies born with medical needs, and neurodivergence.
If we are a good fit for you, follow us on Instagram. Dr. Morgan is at Dr. Morgan Beitelman, and Brienne is at It's Brienne Colpitts. You can find the podcast on YouTube and Patreon at Parenting Neurodivergent Humans.
And as always, if you have a question or topic you want us to cover, send us a note. You can message us on Instagram or use the Google form in the show notes.
And as always, thank you to our editor and producer, Erica Carpenter. We appreciate you.
Thanks for joining us. See you next week. Today, we are actually going to dive into learning disabilities because they are often so misunderstood.
Just a quick disclosure, this podcast is for educational purposes only. It does not constitute a psychologist-client relationship and should not be used in place of an expert evaluation or therapy.
A little rundown of dyscalculia, dysgraphia, dyslexia. Wait, not in that order. Dyslexia first, but yeah.
Says the dyslexic.
I was like, and I said all those in the wrong order.